Good morning, afternoon, or even evening, depending from where you are connecting. So welcome to this webinar on taking gender-sensitive approaches to promote child development and prevent child labor in the coffee and cocoa value chains. This is the third and final of a series of 3 webinars of the Cocoa and Coffee Initiative. The first one launched a publication entitled Changing the Terms of Women Engagement in the Coffee and Cocoa Value Chains. And the second one focused on gender and climate smart agricultural practices in the referred value chains. So before entering into the substance of the webinar, for those who did not participate in the previous ones, let me to provide a brief introduction of the Cocoa and Coffee Initiative. So in 2016, the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, the Royal Tropical Institute, KIT, and TWIN established an initiative, the Cocoa and Coffee Initiative, basically to build on the respective and complementary knowledge, expertise in gender and agriculture investment generally, but also in coffee and cocoa specifically. So based on the assumption that women and men participate in the production, processing, and marketing of coffee and cocoa, but that the benefits that women grasp from their engagement is generally lower than that of men, the initiative aims at fostering gender equitable value chains, while at the same time transforming the gender relations at various levels. But why cocoa and coffee? So basically there is evidence that women face similar issues in both chains and that the various actors involved experience similar gender constraints. But also because a variety of actors in both sectors have manifested their interest and actually adopted measures and approaches for promoting gender equality and empowering women, this as a way to increase their benefits and ensure their future sustainability. Also, evidence shows that they are good practices, that they are gender innovative approaches in coffee and cocoa that can be disseminated and promoted. Therefore, this means that there is a scope for mutual learning, cross-fertilization, and collaboration amongst sectors and actors. Within this context, the Cocoa and Coffee Initiative has 3 main objectives. So the first one is related to knowledge generation. And so basically it aims at identifying and systematizing and also disseminating gender innovative approaches, strategies, and good practices. The second is related to collaboration and partnership. And so the objective is to create spaces of dialogue among a wide range of actors to exchange knowledge, experiences, and also to foster collaboration and partnership. And the third one is related to capacities. And so the objective is to enhance the gender-related capacities of the different actors so that they can uptake and scale up the good practices. Since the partnership started, 3 main activities have been carried out. In 2016, we organized an international multi-stakeholder consultation on gender-sensitive cocoa and coffee value chains. And this consultation was attended by more than 50 actors from the different stakeholder groups along the value chains. Then a process of documentation and systematization of the gender innovative approaches and good practice implemented by 8 of the organizations that attended the mentioned consultation was carried out. And this finalized in the joint publication that I mentioned that was launched in the first webinar. And then finally, the final activity is this series of 3 webinars. So with this, before giving the floor to Ewan, that will provide some information regarding the logistics and procedures, I would like to acknowledge the important participation that we have. At this point, we have more than 100 participants, what shows that this theme raises a great interest. And so I thank you, all of you, for your interest and participation. I hope that you will enjoy. Now, Ewen, it's over to you.
Thank you, Marta. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this first Corona webinar that we are hosting in this interesting period. My name is Ewen Le Borgne. I am Knowledge Management and Communication Advisor at Kit Royal Tropical Institute, and I'll be moderating today's webinar on the topic, taking a gender-sensitive approach to promote child development and prevent child labor in coffee and cocoa value chains. Before I explain very briefly the agenda, a few technical things to mention. We expect that all of you will actually be muted throughout the webinar. Keep it that way, unless we come to the Q&A part, and that's another story. I'll get there in time. Also, to keep your video off throughout, except for us speakers at the moment, and also when the question and answer session starts. This is just to prevent that we have some bandwidth issues for some participants. As everyone is experiencing these days, unexpected things always happen with online meetings. So we also expect that unexpected will hit us again. So this is just a word of warning. Let's just be playful with it and embrace whatever happens in this session. We hope it will go very smoothly. This webinar, for your information, will be recorded, and a link to the recording will be shared with everyone in the digital digest, which will be prepared by the team shortly after this webinar. So now, just to introduce very briefly the process, after this short few words, I'll invite Ariane Genthon, whom I'm going to introduce also, to herself introduce the topic a little bit more in depth and also introduce our speakers. And then we will proceed with a couple of presentations, followed by 25 minutes of questions and answers, more or less, before some closing words, special closing words from Anna Laven, in particular, because we are closing this series at the moment, and that will be it. So without further ado, let me just introduce Ariane Genthon, who will introduce this topic. Ariane has been working for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations over the last 6 years. She works in a decent rural employment team for social policies and rural institutions division of FAO Rome. And before joining FAO, she worked for the training center of the International Labour Organization, where she was supporting training activities on forced labor, child labor, gender equality, and labor migration. She's a program officer with an expertise on child labor elimination in agriculture and has technically backstopped activities in several countries in West Africa and other parts of the world, some of them in protracted crisis and humanitarian contexts. I think we are in very good hands with Ariane to introduce this webinar, and enjoy.
Well, thank you, Ewen, and hello, everyone. Thank you for being with us. So I'm going to do a very quick introduction to our thematic today on taking a gender-sensitive approach to promote child development and prevent child labor in coffee and cocoa value chain. So first, let's speak about what is at stake here. No, we know that cocoa and coffee are global value chain, but we also know from media and other sources that the pressure for sustainable production in cocoa and coffee is rising, is increasing. That pressure is coming from consumers to obtain certification standards, to meet due diligence requirements. We know that countries are more and more adopting national legislation in terms of due diligence. And among the main interconnected social demands, there is gender equality, really a demand that is explicit about that, about economic empowerment of women, and about no child labor. We also know that small-scale producers and family farmers are very much involved in the production of those value chains, for cocoa and coffee. And the lower tier where production occurs is the most difficult to monitor. So how can we help those small-scale producers to meet those enormous challenges and to really improve their livelihoods and practices? So first, let's define very briefly the terms of our discussion today, which are child development and child labor, so applying gender consideration to child development and child labor. Well, to be very brief, child development is about health, physical development of children, education, cognitive development, and social skills. And when we look very briefly at those criteria, we realize that they are very much interconnected, overlapping somehow with a criteria about what defines child labor, no? Because we know that the task that children, if they undertake tasks that are harmful for their health, impeding them to attend school and to acquire social skills, it will enter in the definition of child labor. So to go a bit more into depth into what is and what is not child labor, you have in front of you what is a very summarized, let's say, definition of what is and what is not child labor. So child labor interferes with compulsory schooling, is a task that is hazardous. It engages children below the national minimum age for employment, and usually it is 15 years old of age, according to ILO convention. It can be 14 for developing countries, and that's an exception. And it's work that in general is mentally, physically, spiritually, or morally dangerous and harmful to children. So in a nutshell, child labor is not all age-appropriate tasks that are not hazardous and do not interfere with a child's education. So now let's move on, and we will look at the gender aspects of child labor situation. So how girls and boys are involved in child labor in cocoa and coffee value chain. Well, we know that gender roles, birth order, and social norms often dictate occupation and tasks that are undertaken by boys and girls, who will work among the siblings, and who gets an education. What we know is that in the cocoa and coffee value chains, as in other value chain and agricultural subsectors, boys and girls less than 10 years old tend to perform the same tasks and to accompany their mother in the field. The gender differences in child labor will increase with age, and so it means that from 11 years old onwards. What I'm saying is some patterns that have been observed, and of course, it needs to be contextualized and made differ from country to country. We have also to take into account that data available on girls and boys labor in agriculture and in cocoa and coffee is limited. We know from recent data that 2,100,000 children are in child labor in cocoa farming in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. On the other hand, there are less data available on coffee farming, which would give us a good overview of really how many children we are talking about in that value chain. But we know that girls and boys can undertake quite a different range of tasks in those value chain. So they are not only performing one type of tasks, and that girl tasks are not strictly associated to only cocoa and coffee related tasks, but that can perform tasks that are less visible and so less captured, and tend then to underestimate the number of girl children in child labor in those value chain. The condition of work, exposure to risk and hazards of boys and girls can be different. To give you a bit of example to let you understand a bit more what are boys and girls doing in those value chain, well, in cocoa production, you can observe, unfortunately, boys and girls that are harvesting overhead cocoa with hook, or that will be breaking cocoa pods with a sharp knife, or carrying heavy bags of cocoa. In coffee production, it is quite widespread to see young boys and girls harvesting coffee, but girls will be also overrepresented in spending many hours doing household chores. So just to give you a very overview of what girls and boys are doing, boys will tend to be more involved in hazardous tasks than girls, but girls will combine cocoa and coffee related tasks with household chores that will take much of their time. So we move on to the gender dimensions of the drivers of child labor, which means that gender inequality is actually a driver of child labor. And we know that in agriculture, as in coffee and cocoa value chains, rural women tend to earn less than men, and they may rely on their children to supplement household income. Women have limited access to training, land, and other resources, which make them more vulnerable to shocks and so to negative coping strategies, such as putting children to work and removing them from school. Also, women bear the triple work burden, and they often need their children to help out, especially with when care facilities are lacking. And finally, social norms, traditions can tend to not value girls' education, to have early marriage and pregnancy as an issue, and the school environment can be hostile to the presence of girls. So how do we meet those challenges? Here in front of you, you have examples in some over value chains, but also in cocoa and coffee, of gender-sensitive strategies that have been adopted towards child labor and child development. We could also say that those strategies are gender transformative. But now we are about to hear about colleagues that have undertaken actually very interesting experiences to try to promote child development and child labor with gender dimensions in cocoa and coffee. So we will hear about our colleagues that are working from Kyagalanyi in Uganda in the coffee value chain. And this is Emmanuel Bukomeko, who is the scheme manager for the West-Nile Arabica scheme of Kyagalanyi Coffee Limited in Uganda since 2014, but we talk about the experiences of Kyagalanyi in coffee. And then we will hear from Likegine, who is a program manager on sustainability at Cocoanect in Ghana, and she focuses on gender, child labor, and community development projects. And so now I hand over the floor to Emmanuel to hear about the experiences of Kyagalanyi in Uganda. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Emmanuel Bukomeko from Kyagalanyi Coffee Limited. I will discuss on the integration of gender and child education approaches, bringing on the experience from West-Nile, Uganda. Next. Specifically about Kyagalanyi Coffee Limited, Kyagalanyi is part of Volcafe group. We are Uganda's #1 coffee exporter and probably in East Africa, and we have a very strong sustainability department. We have over 21,000 certified households as of 2019, and we offer a range of services and innovative approaches to our member farmers. Next. In particular, the West-Nile Arabica scheme was started in 2014. It boasts of 6,800 households and 27 farmer support staff. We started this scheme because with the objective of sustainably improving coffee production and quality through a range of services to the farmers. This included equipping them with processing equipment, having agronomy and individual household trainings, then a number of other projects, for example, the Coffee Youth Teams project, the Gender project, and Child Education projects. We are UTS and CAFE practices certified, and that means that our member households should not have child labor. Next. Gender for Growth as a project was started because we thought that if a husband and wife do not work together, then the household would not adopt the better practices, and this would lead to failure to improve their livelihoods. So the objective was to improve gender relations at household level. This project started in the last quarter of 2017. It currently has 1,200 gender households in 60 clusters or groups. Now, each one of them makes a VSLA, a Village Savings and Loans Association. We have one gender officer who is supported with a number of change agents, and the project is supported by Strauss, and ABI development. Next. The child education project was started because many of our certified households cannot afford to send their children to school. And the objective was to promote child education. We've had 2 projects so far, and the first project started in 2015 and ended in 2017. It's what we call the Child Labor Free Zone project. After this, in 2018, we started another project which evaluates 3 levels of intensity or activities and investment in different areas. And this will run from 2018 and it will end mid this year. We are 3 partners with one message, that all children should be in school. We have the NGO called SAFERD. Its focus is mainly on communities and local leaders. We have the Uganda National Teachers Union, emphasizing with activities more to the schools. And Kyagalanyi, we look more to we focus more to the certified members. This project is supported by UTS, Rainforest Alliance, and HIVOS. Next. Now, I'll draw more the integration of gender and child education approaches, looking at the Village Savings and Loans Associations, call them VSLS. These meet on a weekly basis to save and borrow. You save by paying your weekly shares. Then the shares at the end are used for personal development and paying school fees. Members can get loans with a small interest rate to pay school fees and then have other investments to boost household incomes. And as a requirement, to become a member of a VSLA, you must have all your children in school. Next. Also, VSLAs save a social fund. Here, members can borrow, but without interest, for emergencies such as school fees, medical treatment, and burial expenses. The other one is the education fund, where a VSLA supports a disadvantaged but bright child to remain in school through some small contribution by each member. So the social fund and education fund are paid fixed amounts that are paid on a weekly basis. Can you hear me well?
Yes, go ahead.
So, okay. To us, VSLAs are entry points for the trainings. For example, the sensitization on child education and child labor by our child labor liaison officers. Here are topics like, what is child labor? What are its causes? How do you identify it? What are the remediation strategies? And the importance of child labor are discussed before the saving starts. Then also other trainings, like the agronomy trainings, where field staff come in to train farmers to improve coffee income, and the additional income is always about paying school fees and other investments. Next. So this, we also integrate with other gender tools. For example, the household vision. This tool helps households, and now the household comprises of the husband, the wife, and the children, all together, to develop a vision. And this vision may be, for example, sending children back to school. It encourages planning as a household, and the tool helps the household to evaluate their progress with time. Next. Another tool is the household plan and budget. The tool helps the household to budget for to allocate resources for household development and child labor. It promotes joint decision-making and transparency on resource use. Before the introduction of this program, most of the household decisions were made by the husbands, but of late, all of them sit together. The other tool is the gender harvest game, and this game simulates situations that happen in the real life of our farmers. The game teaches the importance of joint decision making. It encourages educating children, and it also the adoption of the good agricultural practices and intercropping them so that the household earns more income. Next. So what have been the results of this integration? One, on the side of the gender, women are more empowered. For example, 300 of the 480 VSOA leaders that we have are women. Remember, each group, each VSOA has 8 leaders, and we have 60 of them. The households these days work together as husband, wife, and children. On the side of coffee production and income, we see productivity, which is yield per tree for the coffee, has increased by over 50%. And the general income for the household has increased by over 76%. This looks into the aspects of quality and the intercrops. Next. On the child education aspect, for the first project, which ran from 2015 to 2017, 437 children were returned to school. Of these, 189 were boys and 248 were girls. The second project, which is still running, has so far helped 760 children to return to school. 431 of these are boys and 329 are girls. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Indeed. And we're going to proceed with the second presentation. Thank you for already sending your questions through the Q&A channel. And thank you for some presenters already to respond to them. Over to you, Lika.
I'm unmuted now, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks. So my internet connection is also a bit unstable. That is why I will not use my webcam right now. I think because there are too many people working from home in the Netherlands. So thanks, Ariane, for the great introduction into the topic, and also a big thank you to Emmanuel for presenting the very interesting case of Kyagalanyi in Uganda. And of course, a big thank you to Kit and FVO for inviting us to present for this webinar, thereby giving me a reason to change out of my pajamas today. So thanks for that. I will present a project that is quite similar to Emmanuel's actually, except that it is based in a different country and works with a different crop. Next slide, please. A central question in our project and this presentation is how can we make two proven concepts, namely vis-a-lait and gals, work to combat child labor in cocoa. Next slide, please. First, a quick introduction into Cocoanect. We are a cocoa trading company that builds dedicated sustainable supply chains with farmer groups, local exporters, and chocolate brands. And connected to this, we also design, implement, and supervise sustainability projects covering more than 60,000 farmers in Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, and Cameroon. One thing to note is that Cocoanect will integrate into another company called ETG as of April 1st, which is 1 week from now. And after that, our sustainability projects will be managed under a foundation called Beyond Beans. Next slide, please. Now, a bit of background to the vis-a-lait child project and how it came about. The problem of child labor in the cocoa sector, especially in West Africa, has been well known for almost 20 years and has been covered by plenty of media attention and research. So I don't think there's any need to elaborate on that. In those 20 years, there have been many initiatives to tackle child labor, but they have been mainly focused on monitoring and short-term direct remediation, such as providing school kits and birth certificates. And while this has helped many children, it has not had as much impact as we hoped because of the complex nature of the problem. So we set out to develop a bottom-up community-driven approach that addresses the root causes of child labor based on the VSLA and GALS methods. So first, some basic information of the VSLA Child project that we developed. The project runs from 2019 to 2023 and takes place in Ghana. And we receive funding from the Fund Against Child Labor, managed by the Dutch Enterprise Agency, or RVO. Our partners are the farmer cooperative Cocopa, which has been featured in a previous webinar in this series, and the Ghanaian NGO Participatory Development Associates, or PDA, as well as another NGO called Child Rights International. And we have industry support from our clients, Mars and Ferrero. Now, this slide shows the three main components of our project method and the rationale behind them. And I will go through them one by one. First of all, we have the VSLA, or Village Savings and Loan Association, which Emmanuel already explained in his presentation. So as a quick recap, VSLAs are groups of 15 to 30 people, in our case, who meet every week. And members of the group save money and earn interest on those savings. At the same time, they can access small loans for investing in business, invest in their farm, or they can use them for emergencies such as hospital visits. The benefits of the system are that they enable members to diversify their income, thereby reducing dependency on cocoa and making households more resilient to shocks. And if loans are invested smartly, VSLAs can also lead to higher incomes overall. However, we've seen in the past that when VSLAs are implemented alone, members will too often spend their savings and loans on short-term needs and wants. So that's why some very smart people, which is not me to be clear, came up with the idea of combining VSLAs with GALS, which stands for Gender Action and Learning System. GALS, which has also been covered in previous webinars in this series, uses a highly participatory and visual toolkit to build financial capacity and to help households set targets and make plans on how to reach those by means of household development plans. Additionally, it promotes gender equality and shared decision-making in the household. So why is this so important? It's a well-known fact that women spend money differently than men, benefiting the household as a whole and especially the children. So for example, women are more likely to spend money on nutrition and on schooling. Unfortunately, in countries like Ghana, women traditionally have less access to resources and are less or not at all included in the decision-making of the household. The GALS method addresses exactly those cultural norms and habits and has been proven to lead to women empowerment. So at Cocoanect, we saw how well the combination of VSLA and GALS worked, and we realized that there was an opportunity to leverage this system to have even more impact on child well-being. So our way of doing that was to develop and add the child component, which stands for Child Household Intervention for Learning and Development, because of course we also wanted to have a cool and appropriate acronym. And how it works is that we use the VSLA group meetings to organize sensitization sessions on what child labor is and why it's harmful. And additionally, the method promotes remediation activities by VSLA groups and their members. So this hopefully leads to increased awareness of both child labor and the importance of child well-being. So we renamed the combination of these three components VSLA Child to make it a bit shorter. And with this combination of methods, we aim to address two main root causes of child labor in the cocoa sector, namely poverty and cultural norms and habits. The norms and habits I mean here, for example, include gender inequality, as well as the habits of children helping their parents on the farm doing hazardous tasks. And by addressing these two root causes, we hope to overall reduce child labor occurrence and improve child well-being. Next slide, please. Now, the previous slide suggested that the three components are independent and disconnected, but they're in fact, very integrated. And on this slide, I want to elaborate a bit more on how the child component in particular is integrated in the vis-a-legals approach. In this table, you see on the left side some activities of the existing vis-a-legals approach, and on the right, ideas of how to incorporate the child component. So at the vis-a-leg group level, we do sensitization of gender equality by means of, for example, an exercise called the gender balance tree. And in the same way, the child component includes sensitization sessions on child labor using flashcards. Secondly, vis-a-leg groups will create group development plans, which identify issues in the community that they want to address. And with the child components, we promote a focus on child labor in these plans. For example, they may identify a lack of transport to school as a main driver of child labor in the community. And next, the vis-a-leg members also contribute to a social fund, which they together decide on how to spend. And the child component again stimulates groups to spend these funds on child labor issues identified in the group development plan, for example, by investing in transport means or buying school benches. Then lastly, at the individual household level, the household development plans already promote financial literacy, shared decision-making and business development. But with the individual coaching, that's part of the child method, we further promote investment in child well-being as part of these plans. So far, I've presented the theory of the vis-a-leg child method, but what will we actually do in practice? We will establish 100 vis-a-leg child groups covering 2,500 to 3,000 households, and we provide additional one-on-one coaching for 750 households on their household development plans. And last but not least, we also monitor the occurrence of child and forced labor among 1,500 households. Including 1,000 treatments, meaning vis-a-leg members, and 500 control households. So for this, we use our own data collection tool based on best practices in the sector, and it will allow us to measure whether our approach is really having the effect that we hope it will have. Next slide, please. So results so far. My last slide shows some results so far and next steps. But since we only started last year, we unfortunately don't have as much to show yet as Emmanuel. And also a lot of time in the first year was needed to establish relationships. But I'm happy to say that we formed almost 40 vis-a-leg groups so far, 2 of which are shown in the picture on the right. And we've developed a child module with our partner PDA. We also developed our monitoring tool and completed the so-called control surveys, which confirmed the high presence of child labor in the project areas. Normally, our next steps would be to form the remaining vis-a-leg groups, organize the vis-a-leg Child Champions training, which is a sort of training of trainers on the gals and child tools, and to start coaching on the household development plans. But unfortunately, the reality is that we are currently living in a world impacted by the coronavirus, and I think our project is no exception. So, for example, the Ghanaian government has banned all public gatherings for good reasons, of course. And since this project is very much based on groups getting together, we're currently working hard to find alternatives for all these group meetings. So next slide, please. Thanks very much, and please let me know if you have any questions or feedback, including suggestions on how to improve our method and to adapt to the coronavirus situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lieke and Emmanuel, for sharing very interesting, different and complementary cases also, and some areas of overlap. We have already received quite a few questions, and our speakers have been actually stunning in already responding to some of them in the Q&A box. I'm inviting you to post your further questions in the Q&A box also. We're going to start addressing some of those. If we don't get to address all of these questions by the end of this webinar, what we will try and do is collect them and basically get our speakers to answer them virtually. If I can also invite our speakers to set their webcam on, that would be great. And the final thing I'm going to do before looking at the list of questions is to invite any person in the audience, particularly people that have not yet posted a question in the chat. If you would like to raise your hand, you can do that in the list of participants. There's an option to raise your hand, and well, maybe one of you to verbally express your question. So we'll invite a couple of verbal questions. We have a number of questions already collected, so waiting for that. And maybe Andrea and team, please help me find the people that are raising their hand. In the meantime, we can maybe address one of the first questions. And the first question was to you, Emmanuel, from also a fellow Emmanuel, Junior Zuza, asking, in terms of land tenure systems and women's empowerment, how does this work in Uganda? I'm asking this based on my experience with Malawi groundnut value chain, where land was a limiting factor and is one of the issues which is still a major concern. Did you get that question, Emmanuel?
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm saying,
yeah,
it's true that land is also a limiting factor. So if they buy it, the most common form of land tenure that we have is the customary land tenure, more so here in the West-Nile, where land is passed on to the next generation. Unfortunately, it's only the men who inherit land, and women don't get anything. But when we introduced this project, we advised the men to give some portions or some pieces of land to their wives, so that they can also grow some coffee that would be called their own. And we've seen this, and it's coming out, though the percentages are still low, but more and more women are beginning to own land here in the West-Nile. And the productivity from those gardens that are owned by ladies is real good. So the cultural aspect will slowly change to the better with the intervention of, say, Kyagalanyi and other partners.
Thank you, Emmanuel. I'm checking with the team if we have anyone who has raised their hand. Otherwise, I'm continuing with the list of questions we've received.
I see two people raised their hands, Maggie Makana and Jose Tibus.
Okay, so Mari Makana, could you please open your mic and raise your question? And if you can keep your question short rather than start from in my childhood.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, take it away, Maggie.
Yes, I'm calling from Zimbabwe. I want to find out if these VSLA groups are only women only, or you also including men. We are also implementing the GAUS methodology, and I know it's a household empowerment methodology, and we try to target both men and women rather than women only.
Can either of you?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Can I answer?
Yes, please. Go ahead, Emmanuel.
Yes, okay. For the VSLAs, we use the household approach, so it's both women and men to save. And that's how we say, that's why I said that 300 of the 480 leaders are women. They are both the males and the females, men and women involved in these VSLAs.
And Lika, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I missed the question because the line was breaking up. but I think it was about who can be a member of the VSLAs,
Yeah,
which is in our case both women and men. We also have VSLA Gals groups in Ivory Coast, which are women only, but in this case in Ghana, it's mixed.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to take another question from the list we received already from Mitzi Perez, asking to you, Emmanuel, about the household vision and plan. What was your overall experience in the achievement of milestones of households and the continued use of the tool? Did you get the question, Emmanuel?
It
About the
hello?
Yes?
Yes, sorry. Come on, I beg your pardon?
Okay, let me repeat the question. About the household vision and plan, what was your overall experience in the achievement of milestones of households and the continued use of the tool?
I would say that I was personally overwhelmed by the achievements of these households. When we started out, we thought most of the households were just being overambitious. We thought maybe it's a pivot or whatever has been holding them for this long will still hold them. But after about a year, most of these households, and the change was real impressive. So it starts as it's mostly poverty is embedded within our brains. So once the mindset starts to change and people draw a clear vision with time targets, they can achieve. It's possible.
Yeah. The line is breaking up a bit sometimes, Emmanuel. Can you repeat the last bit?
Well, my internet. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was saying that in the beginning, when households were drawing their household visions, we thought it was a joke. We thought they were overambitious and they would never achieve these targets. But after a year, we started moving around to verify if this tool was really working and there was impact. And to our amazement, most of the households had overachieved on their visions. And that gave us the courage, and we started to believe that truly this tool works and it's very effective, because it's always mostly about mindset change. Was that clear?
Very much. Okay, so thank you for this, Emmanuel. I'm going to invite, I think José Tibus had a question, raise his hand. You've also shared a couple of questions, I think, in the text chat. So please open your mic and let's hear it. José?
Okay. Yes, hello.
Okay.
All right. Okay, for Emmanuel, I'd like to ask, how do you integrate the cultural nuances in terms of child education? Like, for instance, in terms of calendar, the use of calendar. I know for a fact that your area was also having a lot of indigenous practices. So maybe you can share something out of that.
We are not so clear. The line was breaking.
Can you repeat the question, Jose?
Yes. Okay. How do you deal with the traditional practices in terms of child education, particularly in calendar?
Does that make sense to you, Emmanuel?
Yeah. Yes, that makes sense. before we started the child labor free zone project, we had to make an assessment and realize that most households were not sending their children to school because of the traditional beliefs and the kind of mindset that they had. And what we did, we had an approach which would include so many players to come on board. And this included the NGO, the National Teachers Union, Kyagalanyi. We had the local leaders coming on board, the traditional leaders, the local government, the Uganda police, and so many people. So we moved out in teams, and what we had was one message: all children should be in school. So if your traditional leader tells you that, oh, your kids should be in school, and you think you are following the traditional names, then you get to think twice. This was the aspect. They also, the government, the local government was coming out strongly to tell the house or the members that kindly take your children to school. It was repetitive, and everyone was saying the same message. Then people started to rethink. The mindset was kind of changed, and that helped us a lot. And because everyone was saying the same thing, so that's why we worked on this, on the traditional practices. We had also the cultural aspect, where the introduction, when a boy is marrying a girl, this would take a week. You have a full week of dancing, partying, drinking, and what have you. And realize that many girls would get impregnated at such functions. So we sat down with the local leaders and the cultural leaders, the local government, and they decided to reduce this from a week's party to at most 2 days. So this also was to ensure that the number of pregnancies are so reduced, because most of them will drop out of school because they get pregnant. I think that was clear.
Yes, thank you, Emmanuel. And I'm toggling between various screens, including the questions that have already been answered. So sorry, I invite everyone who has already asked a question to see if their question is also being answered there. I'm going to try and source questions that have not yet been answered, and also questions that are for both speakers. So one is coming from François, thanking both for presentations and for all presenters, wondering if you encounter specific constraints while addressing girls compared to boys, while trying to get them back to school, and if yes, how do you address them? So maybe following on from some of the things you've just mentioned also. Could you hear me, Emmanuel? And Lika?
Yes. Maybe I can start because we are so early in the process. We have not started the actual gals and child approach yet. We've just formed the VSLA groups. So that's a bit of a disclaimer. We have very little practical experience there. I think it's a very interesting and useful suggestion to target girls and boys differently. And I think we'll definitely take that suggestion up in the further development of the method. So thanks.
Thank you, Ulrike. Emmanuel, do you want to add anything? Your perspective? Emmanuel? Do you hear the question? Emmanuel, can you hear me? Here we are in the moment when we have the technical issues. Emmanuel, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, but regarding girls' education, the girls,
okay, maybe we'll skip this one for now, Emmanuel. We're going to come back. There's more questions for both of you. Is that okay? So the next question is coming from
Yes.
Rosanne van Vianen, asking, is there a difference, and this is to both of you also, is there a difference in remediation activities for boys and girls in child labor? Do you see a different approach is needed in some cases to get boys or girls out of child labor? Well, this is the same, sorry. Did you get it, Emmanuel?
I think I got that.
Okay.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
I was saying that getting the children from home or from child labor back to school, the same strategy almost works. You don't have to say this is specifically to the girl child, and this will be specific regarding, because you have to keep them at school and prevent them from getting out of school then. So once they get into school, there are different approaches that you have to put into consideration. For example, girls would only be at school if they have the proper sanitary materials. So trainings like helping them to learn how to make their own pads would help them stay in school. Also, hoping the schools get more female teachers and to have a female teacher to whom they can report in case there is a challenge. That is really important for the girl child. Things like latrines. If in a school boys and girls are going to the same latrine, then there are higher chances that girls will drop out of school compared to the boys, because they will always feel ashamed of sharing the same latrine with the boys. So there would be different strategies at the school level, and before they get to the school, it's almost the same, save for preventing pregnancies at the traditional ceremonies like the introductions.
Great, thank you, Emmanuel. And I'm going to ask another. So first of all, to all of you who are asking questions, thank you very much, and keep asking them. Again, we will try and address them partly here and now, partly beyond this webinar, thanks to our speakers. The next question is coming from Selina Butali, who is asking both of you, how did you address social norms and stereotypes that limit women's participation in decision-making at household level? And maybe we could ask Lika to answer this first, to give Emmanuel a break, as you've been solicited a lot.
Yeah, of course. And again, I have to give a disclaimer, because I am not aware of the exact details of the tools that we're using, but I know that the GALS approach has several interactive exercises, including the gender balance tree, I believe, that promote shared decision-making in households, so between women and men. Yeah, and I'm afraid I cannot give much more details, so maybe Emmanuel can jump in again here.
Thank you. Just like you said, the girls' methodology is one of the most perfect tools for incorporating the husband and the wife. So when we start, it's mostly bringing them on as a household, and you discuss the importance of working together vis-a-vis one working for the other or whatever. So when we start the trainings, we train them on the aspects of why it's important to work together as a family, the duty, then through different ways, for example, drama, music, and what have you. We also have to take them to those households that have worked together as a husband and a wife, and they have since divorced, so that they learn from the others. So slowly by slowly, the stereotypes that a man should own this, a lady shouldn't do this, start to fade away. Like I said, it's a mindset change. It's a slow but sure process. Eventually, after 1 year, they all realize that the households that work together are far better off than households where the husband is the only one in charge and there is no household, there's no decision making for the other household members.
Great,
Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And you came out very clearly here. So we're enjoying when the internet connection is good. It's strained around the globe at the moment anyway. The next question is coming from Cristina Ruiz, and it's been echoed by another question. How much are the children consulted or participate in the GALS discussions, or are they only recipient of the results?
Okay, I would say it's still the household approach. When you're making a vision, for example, a household vision, a household budget, you have to sit together as a household. So everyone has an equal say or share in the discussion. It's no longer the husband, it's no longer the wife, it's no longer the children, it's the household. So they would sit down and the father sits down with the wife and the children and make decisions at the household level. So they equally participate.
Okay, thank you. And just to give both of you a break and get back to Ariane, who was also introducing something, we have a question from Han. Maybe you've already answered it. I don't know. Have you? Han Tran was thanking all of you for your presentations and asking you talked about child labor issues and then mentioned gender dimension. But as far as I understand, not really addressed the gender issues in child labor. For example, women earn less, triple work burden, and then the solutions focus on women's empowerment. I would like to understand more about the gender issues in child labor and solutions for this in the case of cocoa and coffee value chains. So also Emmanuel and Lika, if you want to chip in on this, feel free.
All right, if I understand correctly, the question is to understand more where gender issues come in for child labor in cocoa and coffee, and to complement a bit the presentation. Sorry, I don't have the question in front of my eyes, so it was a bit a long question.
Yes, it's along these lines. I'm going to post it. So give your first answer, and then I'll post the question again.
All right. So yes, let's say that child labor is a multifaceted issue. No, it's a very complex one. But what we have observed for sure is that there are two gender dimensions. Let's say two main gender dimensions in child labor. First is that boys and girls are involved differently and for different reasons and in different capacities in child labor. And so that's what I was explaining very briefly, touching upon, let's say, in the presentation, also giving concrete example in cocoa and coffee value chain. So boys and girls tend to do the same tasks while they are small children. When they grow up, they tend to do differentiated tasks. And when they are small, they tend to accompany the mothers, because it is related to also a gender inequality issue, because mothers are time poor or they do not have access to care facilities, etc. And so children, women do not have one other solution than to bring their children along, let's say, no? And the other side, let's say, of gender dimension of child labor is that, yes, gender inequality or some aspect of gender inequality lead to child labor, have negative impact on child labor, and that's what I was listing. So in terms of women having less access to information, to resources, or to care facilities in general, patterns that are being affirmed very early on, no, in terms of perception of what women and girls should do, and in terms of access to skills development, and so on. And I will leave it here for now.
Thank you. I don't know if Emmanuel or Lika want to add anything. You don't have to, just checking.
No, it's okay for me. Thanks. Okay.
So let's proceed with the next question. And I'm looking at the time, and we're probably we're probably coming to the final 2 or 3 questions. From Kimberly Easton, asking to all of you, within these programs, how do you handle the ILO, the International Labour Organization, reporting requirements? I imagine that your staff on the ground must report cases of the worst forms of child labor that they detect. Does this undermine the trust building process in the communities? Emmanuel?
Yes, I'm still contemplating on the question because she's talking about reporting. Yes, we use the ILO guidelines to tackle the aspect on ground, but when it comes to reporting, it's more to first to ourselves, then to report to, say, the donors and report to the authorities where we need their assistance. For example, if we find there is an aspect that we can't work on, we could involve the government of Uganda or the local government to get involved and say, look here, this is what we've found. Can you come in and offer us a hand? So this is the kind of reporting. It could be channeled to the relevant authorities, or to, say, the Ministry of Education, say to the Uganda National Teachers Union, who are also part of them, can you bring in more teachers? Can you do something about this? And also to the legislators, because we report also to Parliament, but this is through our reporting system. We want Parliament to do something, the Parliament of Uganda to do something. So we can use such figures to tell them, can you come up with something, because this is what we are seeing on ground. And that's the kind of reporting I can think of for now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think for us it's a similar situation. The very serious cases of forced labor and trafficking, we will report to authorities. But I think the vast majority of cases that we find are relatively light cases of child labor. They're, for example, a child using a machete to help with the weeding on the farm. And I think if you're going to report those cases to authorities, it's very counterproductive and not really a solution to the issue. So we work on those more internally, and I hope to solve it by means of raising awareness.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if you want to add anything, Ariane, or proceed to the next. No? Okay. So I'm going to stay with you, Lika, and this is also to honor one of the questions from Emmanuel Junior Zuza, who has been one of our champions posting early questions and multiple questions. So we'll try to address all of them, but at least this one now. Have you tried to use the tree for increasing incomes? And if so, how did the participants feel about using it this way?
Yeah, I'm afraid I have to dodge this question again because we haven't started implementation of these tools yet. So I honestly don't know. Yeah.
So stay tuned.
Sorry.
And there will be more. Okay, so maybe we can go to a question by Fortunate Pascal, who was one of our speakers in the past webinars. Thank you, thinking it was at the time of Emmanuel's presentation, thanking you, and also having a question around the terms of child labor and child work. How do you address the two terms in the context of smallholder farmers to understand the difference?
Yeah, thank you. I think I was at Marianne's presentation where she talked about the difference between child labor and child work, where child labor is when the child is mentally, physically, emotionally, and affected. The education aspect is affected, and you're giving that work, that child work that is beyond his or her age and would affect him in those ways. While child work would be any work to develop a full person. For example, if outside school hours, say school runs from Monday to Friday, then on Saturday, I take my kids to the coffee field and teach them how to weed the coffee garden. I teach them how to harvest coffee. I teach them how to process coffee. That's okay, because that's part of development for the child. So we have worked on this ever since, telling them that children must be taught to be responsible citizens. They should learn to work, but the work they do shouldn't interfere with their education and with their personal development. That's the aspect, that's the route that we take.
Can I jump in, Ewen?
Yeah, very briefly as we're closing in. Going.
Of course. So just sharing experience in general with smallholder farmers, what can be a winning approach is first to ask in general to understand what is the situation, what the roles they are giving to their children. And so from there you can determine if indeed or not you're facing situation prevalently of child labor or not. The second thing is to sensitize smallholders about human health, because unfortunately in general, and not only regarding children, but also men and women working in farm settings and in those value chain, there is quite some ignorance about some typical good agricultural practices that would help them to stay safe themselves, and also to understand why children are not like small adults. And so that's why if they perform some task that adults are performing, for them it will have long-term health consequences. And so by the entry point of human health and safe agricultural practices, you can really make a difference and maybe be more easily understood rather than using maybe that vocabulary that is sometimes a bit frightening for smallholders, because they might perceive that as an idea that is not applying to their cultural context. And I leave it here.
Thank you for these additions, Ariane. And I'm afraid participants, everyone, that we're reaching the end of this Q&A. Again, we'll try and address these questions and post them on the webpage of the webinar. We'll share the link for that. For now, thanking all of you speakers very much for really responding to many, many questions. And you must be happy to have a bit more relaxing time. I'm handing over now to Anna to help us close this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewan, and all the presenters. Yeah, it was very interesting again to hear also the similarities between coffee and cocoa cases. When we started this webinar, we didn't intend to have any cases on VSLAs or household approaches, but they popped up as being very relevant. So it's also interesting to hear confirmed that the household approach is actually a very useful tool, and particularly if you have the patience to look at the more longer term impact. I think it's also very valuable that we learned more about the VSLAs and how they can be a building block and in trying to come up with this integrated approach to tackle child labor, promote child development, and address gender inequality. So I think it was super useful, and I think the questions from the audience show that there is a lot of knowledge and insight in the audience, and I hope we can also use our collaboration and our community of practice to bring people together and to share lessons and to continue our work that we've been doing so far. Because this was actually the last webinar of the series, at least for now. We do intend to follow up our collaboration and involve you. So we aim to continue this community of practice, and we also have the ambition to broaden it to involve also the tea sector and also look for more experiences in Asia and to see how we can promote some cross-learning across commodities and across regions, as we have been doing so far. So we are preparing, despite of the coronavirus, for a regional conference in Asia next year. But we also want to look more for collaboration, exchanging best practices, documentation of practices, have more similar webinars like these ones. And we look for collaboration, but also for funding opportunities and to hear your ideas. Maybe next slide, Lisa. So how can you stay involved? Well, we have a small survey that will pop up immediately after closure. Please fill this in because it will help us to know more about your ideas and also how you have seen our webinars so far. So it gives you the opportunity to give feedback and to think along. Like the other time, we will also put the recordings of this webinar, including a digital digest online. We will do that the coming days, so you will be still in the mood for this. Before I really say goodbye, I would like to thank a number of people. First of all, the people you heard in this webinar. So we have the wonderful presentation of Ariane, of Emmanuel, and of Lieke. thank you so much. In the background, you were supported by your colleagues, Anneke Vermont, head of sustainability team of Kyagalanyi. You were there also to stand by. We had Anna van Roekel, who was in Ghana, a standby for Liko, or actually Liko was a standby for her. We have Kasia Jaskiewicz from the FAO team, who also has been more behind the scenes, but very important in all our work and in all the webinars. We have Rebecca Morahan, who you have seen maybe the other time, who's also heavily involved in making this all possible. We have Lisanne Oonk, who is a founder of Cultivar. She has been one of the key organizers for this webinar. So Lisanne, thank you so much. We of course have Andrea Vos, who's responsible for a lot of things, including the wonderful digital digest, who you will see shortly. So she has been really one of the key persons in this initiative. Well, you have seen Marta, you've seen Ewan, you've seen me sometimes at the end. I hope I didn't miss anybody. So maybe the last slide is for you to thank you for everything and your active participation. And well, I think we can be very satisfied with this series. Thank you a lot. We hope to stay in touch.